Yeah, go ahead. All right, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out in the rain on Labor Day. I know that it is absolutely gross outside, although I think it's supposed to get better this afternoon. So today I'm gonna take attendance again. Once I get your names, I can just check you off as you come in, but I want to be sure these first couple weeks. And then we have a warm-up activity, and then we'll dive into talking about research. So, and again, I haven't checked this, so there might be people who have dropped, but I'm gonna go with the one I printed last week, just to be on the safe side. Kate. All right, Justin. Okay. Kylie, I think I saw, yep. Nora. Naya, I think must have dropped. Catherine's plane got canceled, so she's stuck where she was. The worst. Caitlin is on Zoom, and so is Destiny. Lauren. Let's see, Ayana is on Zoom. Cameron. Whitney. Day. Avery. Sadie, I believe. Allie. Sarah, I think I saw. Oh, Sarah, here we go. And Haley. Trinity's on Zoom. Oh, there's Day on Zoom. Yeah, I'm good. She's probably for some people today. Right. So Daryl. Not on Zoom, double checking. Jenna, I saw. Hunter, it's not here. But Grayson is, and Gabrielle is. Okay. Again, hopefully within the next week or so, I'll be able to just check you in. Looks like only a few folks I haven't had before. So, hey, Colin. Alrighty. Before we do the little warm-up activity, I have a very important announcement. Hopefully y'all will be thrilled about. We expanded our family. This is my new kitten. I figured I'd make people smile if we have to be here on Labor Day. Her name is Giza. She's only 4 months old. We just got her yesterday. She's already a good academic cat and blocking what I need to read. And this is Simba, our current cat, and that's about how he feels about it, I think. So we're introducing them slowly. He just knows she exists. Simba, if you're not familiar from The Lion King, is Swahili for lion. And so Giza is Swahili for Black Panther. So we did that so their names coordinate. But yes, now I have 2 cats I'll probably talk about in addition to my kiddo. Alrighty, so if you go on Blackboard, there's a section right underneath information and syllabus that says warm up. And today we're going to do the one on conducting research on psychology. So I'll give you all a sec to get there, and then I'll go over. This is not meant to be any more than 5 to 10 minutes. Just something to get us thinking, get the brain juices going, because I know this can be a little early for I know there are some people who would sort of scoff at the idea that 10 is early, but I know in college 10 can be early, right? Like, I've been there, I feel it. So when you click in to the assignment, what you'll see, and it looks like a lot of you are finding it, so that's good, is just a very short activity. Of if you had to design a research study to study personality, what would you do? How would you do it? And this is fully acknowledging that some of you probably don't have your book yet, so didn't get a chance to read the chapter, right? We haven't done the pieces readings. We haven't talked it through. This is just like in a world where you just thought about doing research on personality, what would you do? So what method would you use? How would you try to measure personality? And then how would you share what you found with the world? So folks in class, go ahead and just like pair up with somebody or get in a group of 3. You can move your desks if you need. You can get up and walk around if you need to. Folks who are on Zoom, I'm going to put you in a couple breakout rooms and make sure that you have this assignment. Go ahead and put a little line for your group and actually type in your answers, and then we can see everybody's answers. So folks on Zoom, you're going to be put into 2 breakout rooms, and you can do this activity there. Cannot temperature regulate. And I'll do that so people can actually read it. So he's right. Yeah. Yeah, for this one specific. No, this yeah, I'm just gonna scroll down to see how people are doing. All right, I'll give you all a few more minutes and then we'll just talk through if you don't get through everything. Again, this is just like magical conjecture. I mean, it depends on what you want to do, I guess. All right, we'll do one more minute here. To make sure. Sure, it's where you're at. It's not happening. Why did you do that? I don't know how they see it. It's wrong. I'm just realizing I told Steven today because my little Zoom window is really blurry. With all the humidity getting in the camera. Alrighty, I'm gonna bring everybody back on Zoom and then we'll talk through these briefly. Oh man, I should have made that a shorter thing. Alrighty. Alright, well, they'll be back soon. They're coming back. Hello, Zoom folks, welcome back. I think we'll just talk through these briefly, and then we'll dive in and find out how personality research do research. And I'm guessing just from what I've glanced through here that y'all are pretty spot on already. So that's awesome. Should be back in a second here. Perfect. Welcome back, folks on Zoom. What we're gonna do is just look through these. So Sarah, Nora, and Haley, you said you would do an experiment through observation or self-data. And then what sort of measure did y'all say you would use here?
Basically, like just trying to find like concrete standard to be able to measure across all people and like their various different settings.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, and we'll talk about that not only here, but also when we talk about assessment next week, I think. So yeah. And then I'm guessing a lot of you, because I can hear snippets of what I'm saying, a lot of people are gonna be saying, publish it in an academic journal, go to a conference, spot on. Alrighty. So then Avery, Jenna, Lauren, and Kylie, I love this idea of multiple case studies. And then doing in-depth tests. The Myers-Briggs is an interesting one. We'll talk about that one next week. It's got some interesting ideas woven into it. And interviews, yes, for sure, interviews. Oh, and then I like the idea, how would you present your findings on social media?
I don't have exact like what you want to do, but just because social media is such a large presence right now, that would be a great way to outsource a lot of people.
Yeah, and this is something academics are trying to figure out, to be perfectly honest. Some academics are really good at this, at presenting their stuff on social media, and some academics not so much, right? I'm sort of like in the in-between, like I can kind of do it, but I forget to do it, right? So there's actually like whole programs to train people to be what's called science communicators. It's like, how do you take the stuff you know and actually get it out there? Excellent. All right, so Whitney and Gabrielle, you're going to look at scenarios. Oh, I like that. And how unexpected scenarios showcase different types of personality. What sort of things would you put in your hypothetical survey?
So we mentioned like walking to class in the rain.
Yeah. Oh
Like,
gosh.
kind of think of like what traits, like a specific trait the student have, like if they have common traits and maybe like do a survey with them, like, are you willing to let the class in the rain, and then see how many actually shows up.
I love that. And then research paper, yep, definitely. And then Daryl, Day, and Yana, I'm gonna try to do yours without making y'all talk. Let's see, a case study, similar to what other people are saying, measuring tool that helps measure traits, having them fill out surveys. Yeah, and the interesting thing is those are kind of the same thing, but we don't necessarily think of it in that way. So a survey usually contains measures, which is interesting to think about. And then a peer-reviewed journal, and it can be easy to access. That's a really interesting thing. You would think so, and some journals are. What happens when you all are doing research for a class and you try to find sources sometimes? Yeah.
Find ones that are great.
They're not very good. What else? Yeah. They're making you pay money, and please don't ever actually pay money. We can use an interlibrary loan and you'll just get it emailed to you. But yeah, they're behind a paywall, right? This is something I talk about when I teach scientific literacy, is like, how are we expecting people to be scientifically literate if we're gatekeeping what they have access to, right? How much do academics get paid to publish these peer-reviewed articles? $0, $0 bucks. And depending on the journal, if you want it to be open access, so other people can access it without having to pay, you have to pay the journal to publish it. A lot of people fund this with their grants, they write it into their grants. But it's a ludicrous system, to be perfectly honest, that the publishers make all the money. Both ways, both off us and then off of the people who buy the subscriptions. Let's see what we got in the chat. Yana's gonna rejoin. Yeah, the Zoom can cause all kinds of technical things. Yeah. Alrighty, so Trinity, Caitlin, and Destiny. Again, I'm gonna try to talk through this without making y'all talk. They want to do a case study and experiments. Again, I like that. Funder talks a lot as you get your book and you're able to read about how doing studies about the same topic in multiple different ways is what he really sees for the wave of the future in terms of how we should be doing research. Observable behaviors. This is great. I just talked about behaviorism in my intro class right before y'all, right? And talking about, yeah, observable behaviors, what can we see, but also questionnaires. I heard a couple of people, it looks like we're going to get to it, using some of the terms from the books like S data, I data. Both questionnaires and observable behavior would be B data, which is the behavioral assessment. So the questionnaires, that kind of feels weird. But some questionnaires actually do ask you sort of like, what would you do in this scenario, right? And then journal and hopefully replicate it. Yeah. All right, let's see. Gracie, Ellie, and Connor. Case study, more in-depth insight. Yep, and I love that you're talking about the S data and the I data. And academic journal. Oh, I love this idea of consistencies and differences over time. Could you guys talk about that a little more?
Yeah, so the case study is typically done one person over a long period of time, so it's kind of interesting to dig into the personality. Question about that is kind of, I guess, controversial, whether personality stays the same or changes over time, like different experiences.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and this is science. This is like what we try to do in science is let's look at the body of work, not just one study, right? So not only one person over time, but let's look at what studies have found over time. And we can find some really good stuff for that. Alrighty, and then Sarah and Cameron, looking at a longitudinal study. Oh, I love this. So tell me how you would do that.
Cameron is on
Yeah, you can do that.
You'd get several individuals, depending on how many you wanted to study, that have certain personality types or traits, whatever you wanted to study, and just study them over a longer period of time and see any changes or similarities.
Exactly, yeah. These studies are great. They're often very pricey because you gotta like try to track people down, right, if they move and things like that. But yeah, there are studies like this that have been done over decades. And so you get really good data about people over time. It's this made me think of, so when I was in my stats class in grad school, our professor had a longitudinal data set that had 20,000 people in it. And what we realized the first day of class when we were trying to use it to run analyses is that the computers in our computer labs didn't quite have the processing power. So every analysis we ran was taking like 5 minutes. So he made us a random subset instead so that we could work with that. Now I think it would be fine. But this was back in like 2004, right? So literally 20 years ago, computers have gotten a lot better since then. Yeah, and this is B data, love that. Measuring personality with something like the Myers-Briggs maybe. Oh, I love that you brought up the academic symposium. Little plug, it's great. So I think they're gonna do it at night in December, and then in the spring we have a whole day that's an academic symposium where people present stuff. So just not even related to this class. Always encourage people to go to that. Yeah, so like I said, we'll do little activities like this sometimes just to like get everybody's juices flowing, get us thinking about things, maybe even in a little more abstract way. And again, what I've learned through many trial and error processes is that it's better when I'm using Google Slides to use the Google captions because they don't go on top of the slide like the Zoom ones do. Alrighty. So today we're going to talk about everything y'all just talked about and expanded and think about how it actually operates. Research is so key to not only personality psychology, but psychology in general. We are a science, as we talked about Friday, we do use the scientific method. And life without research would be pretty dim. Because without research, a lot of these statements would never be refuted. Aristotle said the brain is an organ of minor importance. We know a lot more now, right? It also, this was not unique to Aristotle. If you all know about Egyptian mummification processes, they often took out organs and preserved them in jars. They would just pull the brain out through the nose and pinch because they thought it didn't matter. What's this gunk in the head? So we've learned a lot since then, right? In 1899, over a century ago now, 125 years-ish, Charles Duell, who ran the US Patent Office, said everything that can be invented has been invented. Right? Not true, but sometimes it's really hard for us in the moment without asking these research questions to envision what could come in the future, right? Along those lines, back in 1977, Ken Olsen from Digital Equipment Corp said there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. Granted, that's when computers would have taken up this whole room, right? So that makes sense. I don't think Ken would have ever imagined that we all had these in our pockets, which are computers that have higher computing power than the computers on the Apollo missions that took the astronauts to the moon, right? Usually when I show this quote, I try to count how many computers we have in our house. I feel like my husband's laptop, my laptop, both of our phones. He has a work phone. Do you count my Kindle? That's sort of a computer, right? My daughter has a tablet, you know, and then you just add up really quickly, right? So it's interesting to think about again, like if we just stopped and didn't ask questions and didn't try to question things or be curious, we would be sort of stuck on a lot of this stuff. And so research itself is the systematic search for facts through the use of careful observations and investigations. So only by rigorously testing, say, a personality theory or a therapy technique on a representative group of participants can we evaluate the accuracy and usefulness of those theories and those techniques. This can be especially tricky for psychology in general, because we have to examine people, and people are really complex, right? And like you all were saying in your examples of ideas of how we could do research, right? So like, let's say you're asking someone to fill out questionnaires. Is that person being honest with you? Are they being honest with themselves, right? Sometimes people are kind of in denial about things in their lives, right? And so, and then also like, is this because of a personality trait, or is it because it's a rainy Monday, right? Like that can really influence things. Challenges for clinical researchers or personality researchers include that oftentimes we're trying to measure unconscious thoughts or motives, things people don't necessarily have awareness about themselves. We are trying to assess private thoughts, which again, the person might not want to share. They might not have access to fully. And doing things like monitoring changes in mood. Like, when do I go from just sort of meh to a little happy? Right? Right? It could be really difficult. One of the things I've joked about with classes in the past is like, I wouldn't have to give exams if y'all just had like a barcode on the back of your head I could scan and be like, oh, that's how much they retain. That's creepy. I don't want to do that. Right? You are like kind of the same thing for this. Again, it's creepy, we don't want to do it, but if we could just like scan the back of your brain and be like, oh, that's their personality, our jobs would be a lot easier. But it's not that easy. There's no blood test for whether you are higher on extroversion or introversion, right? So again, we use the scientific method here. And that involves systematically gathering and evaluating information through careful observations. So systematically gathering and evaluating information through careful observations. And this is the heart of the scientific method, regardless of discipline, right? So for us, it might be observations of people, either literally observing their behavior or having them fill out a questionnaire. That's an observation. In chemistry, it might be running through something through a mass spectrometer, right? In bio, it might be looking at something under a microscope, and that's your observation, right? So this is the same across different sciences. And the idea is that hopefully these things will allow us to understand what's going on, or at least get closer to understanding what's going on. So science itself is the pursuit of systematized knowledge through observation. And again, we could be observing a rock in geology, or a person, or in sociology, it might be a group of people, right? It could be that in psych too. There's a reason why our social psych class is cross-listed with sociology, right? We kind of share some things with them. So the objectives are description. So initially it was describing personality traits, describing disorders, right? Describing techniques like therapies that might work. And then prediction is a big piece of this. Not only within the study itself, you're going to come up with a hypothesis to test, right? But then down the road, what are the ramifications? People who have this personality trait will act in this way. And what are those implications for their lives? Does it mean they'll be better at certain types of jobs, right? Does it mean they're more susceptible to certain types of disorders or even physical diseases? We know, for example, that people who are high on what we call type A personality are more prone to have heart attacks and other cardiac related events. We also are looking at what we might be able to control. And this could be just like having a control group in a study, but it could also be, can we try to control behavior of kids with ADHD while they're in class? Do we want to, or do we want to adapt the class? And that's how we control it, right? In a way that allows that neurodiversity. And then understanding is the biggest piece of science, honestly, where we're trying to understand things just on like a overall level, why different things occur, what can be done to help people, right? And so oftentimes what we're searching for in science in general and in personality, psychology science in particular, is a nomothetic understanding. A nomothetic understanding is a definitional level, group level understanding. This is what this personality trait means. This is what this psychological disorder is. You can also have, and of course, like I had one little piece of chalk on Friday, that's fun. Oh, I found it, yay! You can also have what's called an idiographic understanding. And that's an individual understanding. So the way I remember the difference between these two is nomo is name, right? And for idiographic, individual. So an idiographic understanding would be this person sitting in front of me right now, I want to understand them. And this would be in the context of like therapy typically. And so a lot of you mentioned case studies as a possible way to start studying personality. And these are, as several of you said, some of the most in-depth ways you can look at personality, look at a person. So this provides a detailed interpretive description of a single person's life. In psychology, it's often their psychological problems. Again, in a personality context, you might be looking more like a more neutral personality traits. But oftentimes case studies come out of therapeutic settings. So you're looking at their diagnosis, their psychopathology. And so you describe that person in great detail. As you all mentioned, you would do this over time. It wouldn't be like a one-off, right? It'd be over the course of therapy often. You would get this person's permission, right, to write this up, to de-identify them typically. Although there have been some interesting atypical studies where the client is a co-author. It's really interesting. It's rare, but it could happen. But you're typically trying to describe something, again, in depth, how it got operating in this one person. Case studies can be great as a source of new ideas or inspiration for research about behavior or traits. So Freud's theories are based almost entirely on case studies. He was a clinician, first and foremost. He was in that therapy room with folks quite a few hours of the day. That's what he tended to write up, and that's where he tended to try to explain his theories. It can also offer tentative support for a theory. Or you might have a case study that challenges an existing theory. I'm not seeing that theory work with this client. Maybe we need to kind of poke holes in that. It may inspire new therapeutic techniques. I don't think she ever wrote it up, but a friend of mine from grad school had a client with an eating disorder who was really struggling. Eating disorders can be really insidious, so they like almost have like a hold on you. It's really hard to break your mind out of them. And so she used a technique from Gestalt therapy, where you typically imagine like, say, a dead parent or someone who's wronged you, and you put literally an empty chair across from them and you have them talk to that person. And my clinician friend told her client to do that, but to imagine that other chair was her eating disorder. And she said it was very cathartic. The client ended up like screaming at the disorder, like, why won't you leave me alone? And so there's an example of a technique that's not typically used within that type of treatment, but for that particular client, it was useful, right? And a case study could help people to look at it and go, maybe I should try it. And then eventually you might get funding to get a large scale on, is this effective for people in general? Also, case studies can be great to study unusual problems. So, contrary to what things like movies and TV shows show, disorders like dissociative identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personality disorder, are relatively rare. And so I have had 3 different psychologists I very much respect each tell me that in their 20+ year career, they had seen one case of dissociative identity disorder. Well, if that's the case, you're not gonna be able to write a large randomized control experiment, right? So maybe the way you further the science is by writing a case study or consulting the previously published case studies in the literature. One of the classic examples of a case study comes from Freud, and it's the study of little Hans. Little Hans was a young boy who was frightened of horses, whose father brought him to Freud for treatment. Now, this is a little unusual. Freud generally worked with adults. His client population was almost entirely wealthy adult women, actually. But in this special case, he did see this child. Freud decided that little Hans's fear of horses was linked to the Oedipal complex, which we'll go over in a lot more detail in a few weeks, but essentially is the idea that little boys want to seduce their mom and get rid of their dad. Freud, it's literally everyone who came after Freud, even his disciples, were like, no, on the Oedipal complex. Freud saw the fact that little Hans had once seen a horse fall in the street and was terrified by this experience as insignificant. Right, a modern behaviorist would be like, well, duh, right? But Freud saw it as insignificant. A different type of, and I swear, this eye comes back and haunts me every time. Every time I think I've deleted it, it returns. It's like a typo I made years ago, and then whenever I copy this over, the typo returns. But Eloise Alzheimer was a doctor in the early 1900s, and he described a patient exhibiting symptoms of forgetfulness, disorientation, and a general decline in level of functioning. The patient he described was later referred to as having Alzheimer's disease, what we now sometimes call Alzheimer's dementia. And Eloise Alzheimer was the first to give a detailed descriptive account of this disease. So that's another thing that a case study can be used for. There are some advantages, as you all pointed out, right? It really does justice to the subject. It really looks at the entire person and the entire phenomenon. You get the context, much more so than any other type of research study we're going to talk about. It generates ideas for future research of other types. And sometimes, as I've mentioned, it's necessary. Sometimes there's literally no other way to study something if you have like one client who has this. It could be rare, it could just be you see it infrequently in the area you're in, right? There are some limitations on the case study technique. There are limitations on any of these methods we're going to talk about. One is that it's not controlled. So you can't weed out what we sometimes call noise in research, which are other extraneous variables that could be influencing things beyond, like, let's say, their personality in this case. There's lots of different variables and facts that may influence what's going on in one individual person's lives, right? And it's really hard to parse out and determine which are the relevant ones for your case study. You might have bias on the part of the observer, so the therapist or person writing up the case study, or even the reporter. So for example, little Hans's father was a great fan of Freud's work. He read Freud's books. So he tended to report information that supported Freud's theories and ignored or de-emphasized the information that did not. So it's not entirely Freud's fault. So, and there are times when the client, especially if you have a good client therapist relationship, they'll want to say things that make you happy. Maybe 10 years ago now, there was a book that came out about the famous dissociative identity disorder case of Sybil. She had a TV series made about her, or like a mini series. And there's some suggestion that Sybil may have manufactured her multiple personalities. And that's because her therapist, who she'd been seeing for a while, had a great bond with, told Sybil, I'm only going to treat people with multiple personalities from now on. then all of a sudden Sybil had multiple personalities. Now, did that mean Sybil never had them? Maybe not. Maybe it just like brought it out of her, but it's certainly sketchy, right? So you have to kind of watch that bias and make sure you're not unduly influencing your case study. And that's where consent becomes really important, right? You want them to know they can say no if they need to. Case studies also rely a lot on subjective evidence rather than objective things. You're not typically giving your case study person a lot of questionnaires. You could, but you're not observing them out in public in most cases. They also make it really hard to generalize, right? You're studying one particular person at one particular time in one particular situation. And so that information is often relevant only to that one individual that you are describing. So it doesn't generalize to all people who have that particular disorder or personality trait or whatever issue you are studying with them. All right, a more rigorous method is the correlational method. And let me just say something really quick here. So probably on Wednesday, just looking at the time, we'll get to talking about the experimental method. Today we'll talk about the correlational method. For a long time, people said the experimental method, doing a true experiment, was the gold standard. If you're doing research of any kind in personality or psychology in general, you should be trying to do an experiment. More and more, the correlational method is also being recognized as a gold standard. If you do correlational research for some reason today, even though this is the research I do, if you do correlational research well and have it very carefully designed, it can actually give you more information, sometimes more accurate information than an experiment can. So these are used quite frequently in personality research and psychological research in general, especially obviously for studying people. And it can give us some really good quality info that you can't necessarily get in a manufactured laboratory setting. So correlation abstractly measures the degree to which events or characteristics vary with each other. So it's basically the relationship between or among two or more variables. If one variable does this, what happens to the other variable? The variables are measured as they exist in nature. There's no experimental manipulation of the variables. And what we're measuring when we look at this quantitatively, when we look at correlation with numbers, is the strength of the relationship among those or between those variables. So when we get something that's called a correlation coefficient, what it's actually showing us is how strong is the relationship between those variables with the numerical representation. So a classic example of a correlational study, have someone fill out a questionnaire about stress and also one about depression. And then there are statistical techniques you can use to see, well, it would be a bunch of someones, I should say, maybe 20 or 100 or 200 someones. And then there's a statistic you can use to see how related those two variables are. Essentially, how do they vary with each other? In this case, you are not making the participants stressed. You're not making them depressed. You're just measuring their stress and depression as it exists in that particular moment. There are actually experimental techniques where you can do that. So they'll play like sad music or a sad movie to try to sort of make people feel not quite depressed, but at least sad. Or you can give people unsolvable math problems and tell them to solve it. You don't tell them they're unsolvable. And then you try to produce stress in them and see how they'll react. Right? You always debrief people and tell them like that was unsolvable. You did the best you could, right? And if you make them feel depressed, then your responsibility is to make them feel happier at the end, so you undo it. But in a correlational study, you're just measuring it. The most important thing to remember about correlation is that correlation does not imply causation. So what that means is if you find a correlation between two variables, it does not mean one causes the other one. So let's take our stress and depression example. So let's say we find that people who have higher levels of depression also have higher levels of stress. That's all we can say, right? We can't say depression caused the stress, because we don't know that. It is a possibility, right? We know that people who are depressed often can't get done what they want to do, and so they get stressed out because of that. You can't say the stress caused the depression, even though we know from other studies that people who are really stressed out are more susceptible to depression. But there could be a third thing going on. Maybe this whole group of people has just been hit by a tragedy, right? There's a campus in one of the University of Wisconsin regional campuses where it was like the first week of school, like here, and one of their students was just shot and killed. It was a student athlete, right? Like that whole community might be stressed and depressed, not because one is causing the other, but because they just had this tragedy within their community, right? And it's sad that like stories like that aren't that unusual anymore, right? So the other thing that we look at, as I mentioned, numerically, is the magnitude of the correlation. So correlations can range from +1 to -1. And this throws people off sometimes. 0 is the weakest correlation. So if you have 0, you can just think of it as there's 0 correlation, there's 0 relationship between these things. +1 and -1 are equally strong correlations. Again, if you're not very attuned to stats, never had this before, you might think that's not how math works. It is not what I've been taught. But I'm going to explain why that is. All right, so a positive correlation means that as one variable increases, the other one also increases. So in this case, we have our depression and stress, and you can see that people who score high on one are also scoring high on the other. People who score low on one are also scoring low on the other. They're usually not quite this pretty, as you can imagine, but if all data was that pretty, man, here's going to be easy. And so this is a positive correlation, both move in the same direction. A negative correlation is where as one increases, the other one decreases. So the example here is depression and activity level. So here you see that people who are higher on depression have lower activity levels. Again, to give you an example of how correlation is not causation, there's a couple different reasons this could happen. One is that people who are depressed, a symptom of depression is engaging in fewer things you enjoy. We know that people who are engaging in fewer things you enjoy tend to feel more sadness and depression. Or again, there could be a third thing going on. Maybe, one of these individuals broke their leg, and so they can't do their normal activities and they're depressed about it, right? And one thing I want you all to notice is that if you held a mirror up between these two slides, they're a reflection of each other. So these two correlations are equally strong, just one, the positive one, both scores increase, one, the negative one increases while the other decreases. No correlation, again, that's 0 correlation, it's just there's not a relationship between these two variables. So here we see depression and IQ. We know that smart people can be depressed. We know that people who are not as smart can be depressed, right? And anyone in between. There's no causation, there's not even any correlation here, right? And this can happen with stuff you don't expect. Again, data is messy. I've had times where like a thing that always predicts body image, like viewing of images of photoshopped people, right? Does not in that particular study. And it could just be a quirk of that population or how I collected the data, asked the questions, right? So you get no correlation sometimes. Alrighty, we will end there for today, and we'll pick up on ways that we can analyze and expand on correlation on Wednesday.